We have another PWHL trade to talk about. Also, the Northeastern Huskies sit on the top of the Beanpot hill or whatever, and we're going to talk to a Northeastern alum on today's episode.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL, your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, hosted by Rachel Donner and yours truly, Erica L. Ayala. We have a jam-packed episode for you, including we're going to give you a snippet from a very important interview that we have. We'll talk about that in a little bit, Rachel. Before we get into that, today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You can download that Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That will get you $20 off your first purchase. Rachel, we have a jam-packed show, but we got to start with a vibe check. How are you feeling in the WoHo world and otherwise?
Well, anybody who knows me knows that I despise Boston sports with all of my heart and soul, right? And this goes up and down the line. Doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter the situation. It could be badminton. I don't care. If it's Boston, it's bad, right? I'm starting to vibe with the Boston Fleet a little bit here, and it's making me nervous. Like, this is not supposed to happen, but good things are happening with the Boston Fleet right now, and they're playing well, and I don't know. There's something to it.
See, I feel like maybe I have a little bit of a bone to pick with Boston this week, and that is directly related to our first piece of news, and that is that the aforementioned Boston Fleet and the New York Sirens have made a PWHL trade. Now, this is a like-for-like trade, as in only two players total are involved. Jill Saulnier going to Boston and Taylor Girard going to New York. Now, I will start by saying I know Taylor's game very, very well. She played in the PHF. I was a broadcaster there, and I talked a lot about what she can do on special teams, particularly the power play, because she played with the Connecticut Whale, and they were really good at the power play, her and Kennedy Marchment. So I'm really excited to see what this unlocks for Taylor. But let's talk about the trade from Saulnier's perspective. Now, she wasn't really in the mix much for New York. Some of that had to do with a long-term injury she was dealing with, Rachel.
Yes.
And so that we have to take that into account. And also between the two of them, the Sirens basically had a bye week. They will be playing later today when this recording goes up live. But so we haven't seen Girard in action, but we have seen Jill Saulnier. So let's talk about the trade from the Boston perspective. Why replace Girard with Saulnier, and what are we expecting from Jill on this Fleet roster?
Yeah, I think, there's a little bit more vague talk about Saulnier for sure in terms of what she brings. And Jill Saulnier has had an incredible career, but, I would say her skills are not where they used to be. That's for sure. And, they're talking about her presence and her physicality and all of that. And I think that's absolutely fair. And she will, and, has already started to contribute to Boston's play. In her first game there, she played a little over 6 minutes. So, like, very limited thus far. And, she kind of got into it net front a little bit in that game, but, no shots and had a penalty, I believe, in the game. So, not much to speak of yet. And, Coach Kessel said something to the effect of, we appreciate her leadership and, her sticking up for her teammates and all that. But it's unclear, like, exactly what her role is going to be moving forward, I think.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it. This is a Boston team that, they seem to have a little more juice to them. And Jill Saulnier did make that appearance, as you said, but was not a part of the six forward lines proper. It was kind of like a rotating forward which we saw in New York at times. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if Boston does just need that leadership presence, because I think there
Right.
is something to that. We've talked about how this is a Boston team, and even last year I was with them in Seattle. They were talking about it took them a little while to get ramped up, and so is that a part of that? They have a relatively young squad in very key places, so maybe that's what Saulnier brings. We'll have to see. Now on the side of New York, I have to say, Rachel, I kind of think, at least from what I know of these two players, but especially of what I know about Taylor Girard, I think New York wins this trade with a caveat, because I think the what I see as what Taylor Girard can do in a league like the PWHL, we haven't seen her do that in Boston. So this is only a win for New York if they really give Girard some ice to cook. That's mixing metaphors, but the point is, she is a player that I think has a high upside. You talk about Jill Saulnier. I think we all can agree that she has, you know, fewer games behind her than in front of her. I think it's the exact opposite for Taylor Girard. Taylor Girard, that is, brings size. She's got great size. And in
Yes.
this game, you don't really see forwards at her size that can skate and move and maneuver and have silky mitts the way you see with Taylor Girard.
Yeah, and, you look at Taylor Girard's season last year for Boston, limited scoring, 4 goals and 2 assists, in 23 games, hadn't gotten on the board yet this year for Boston, but was the usage right? And was, the general, play of Boston affecting that, given that they did get off to a slow start? I'm really looking forward to seeing what she can do in New York as well.
Yeah, and we did hear from the GMs. I thought Pascal's comments, he kind of, in his way, and I think he's speaking English, um, kind of as a secondary language, right, for us in the media. But I get the sense that it was a trade that they were interested in making. New York did initiate, Pascal said that they initiated the conversations, but I think that he, as a general manager, and I don't know if other GMs maybe feel this way too, because we've already talked about a trade, Rachel, and how the conversations about the trade were more detailed coming from one camp than another. I think it's kind of the same here, but what Pascal was saying is that there are limited options. And he went on
Yes.
later, yeah, and that's because you don't have prospects. There's not a prospect pool. You can trade for picks kind of, but the way that your I was gonna say lottery, because yes, but there's not really a lottery, right? It depends on how you end the season. So you might be a team that's out of the playoff picture at the time that you're making a trade, and then you find yourself in the playoff picture, or vice versa. And it's not so easy to determine where you're going to be in the draft or where anyone else is going to be in the draft. So I think that's another little caveat that makes it a little hard for trades. But so finding what Pascal said is like a like for like can be difficult. And I think he was pretty open about that. Now, I don't want to say he wasn't detailed, but he was outspoken about how, generally speaking, that's a little bit of an issue. But again, it sounds like Taylor Girard is still going to be in more of a bottom six role,
Yep.
expecting her to be on the PK. But I think he also left a window open for one. He flat out said, sometimes our top six, they need rest. So, Taylor Girard can be someone reliable to maybe take on more minutes if there is a situation where you need to get your top six rest. But again, my sneaking suspicion is, Rachel, that if Taylor Girard is given, I don't know, if you want to say even an average of 2, 3 more minutes on the ice than she's been given with Boston, I think she can make a compelling case to be more of a mainstay on this New York roster. But then that becomes difficult for players like, you're looking at wingers like Chloe Girard, Elizabeth Giguere, how many of them
Right.
are going to be able to step it up. Giguère has always been interesting, even in the PHF. I think lots of potential, doesn't always execute fully on the ice. So maybe this is a wake up call for a player like Giguère. But I guess we're just
And
going to see.
certainly so for in-game adjustments. Like,
Right.
that's where I see it coming into play more than anything, is
Mm-hmm.
that, if Taylor Girard's, starting off a game on the 3rd line or 4th line, if things aren't going well for the Sirens, bump her up for a few shifts and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And New York is going to get that chance potentially as they take on the Toronto Scepters this afternoon on Saturday, January 25th. They also have a game a little later in the week. And by that, I mean Monday. So not really later at all. That's a quick turnaround, but they just had a bunch of time off. So I think that's also going to be interesting. How well were they able to integrate Taylor Girard? We'll probably talk about New York a little bit later on the show. But coming up next, Rachel, I want us to talk a little bit of college hockey because we had the Beanpot and Northeastern reigns supreme. And it just so happens that we have a former Husky that's joining us on today's episode. We'll get into all of that and more coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. And one of my favorite things I recently went to using Game Time was the Broadway show Wicked. Now, Game Time makes it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I was looking for tickets to Wicked because I saw the movie recently, wanted to make sure I remembered how it ended. And with Game Time Picks, I found an amazing deal. I could even see the view from my seat before buying the ticket. And the super deal was particularly impressive. It offers great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
That is a boss move for sure. I've been thinking about doing the same because I was watching the movie and I couldn't remember all of the details from the play.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, I gotta do that again, especially before part 2 comes out. But anyway, we're here for another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. And I am a little gutted, Rachel, that I didn't make it to Beanpot this year. This is the second consecutive year where the Beanpot tournament was held at TD Garden for the men and for the women. So yay, equity. We hate that you take so long, but we're always welcome to see you walk through the door. Late as you may be, we will always accept you. But this was the 20th Beanpot win. And maybe we should back up a little bit because we're both New Yorkers or from the Northeast. So people who are not from the Northeast, this is an in-season kind of tournament of champions among the Boston area, because I know some of you get very particular about that, the Boston
That
area
is true.
schools. So there's 4 schools, Harvard, Boston College, Northeastern, and Boston University, that every year on the men's and women's side compete for the Beanpot because, Boston beans. Who doesn't love Boston beans?
Sure.
So that's what we're talking about. Third consecutive title, 20th overall, in front of a crowd of over 13,000 fans to watch women's hockey, on what was it, Saturday, Monday, or something like that. So pretty exciting for Northeastern, and a lot of ties to the Beanpot and the PWHL. Last year, I got to talk to Corrine Schroeder. She was inducted into the 2024 Beanpot Championship. She's playing for New York at the time. Was hoping to go up for the ceremony, but couldn't make it. Chloe Girard, who's also her teammate, among those people. I mean, but that's we also have Aaron Frankel, Alina Mueller, uh, Katie Knoll. I mentioned Girard already. Brooke Hobson, Gwyneth Phillips, Jessie Comfer, who played at BU, Kayla Barnes before she went to the WCHA, folks, Alex Carpenter, Callie Flanagan, Emrance Mashmeyer. So Emrance and Kareen are two players that are in the Beanpot Hall of Fame. Then you have, of course, Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, who we will talk about. But Rachel, you got to watch the championship game. BU
Yes.
versus Northeastern. There's always, it's like a built-in rivalry in an in-season championship. So
Right.
it gets pretty intense.
This was the second year in a row it was those two teams in the championship. So Boston University going down 2 years in a row must be difficult for them. This was a three-peat for Northeastern, as you mentioned. In that first championship, they had defeated Boston College. So it was Boston College and then two BU victories. And like Northeastern is pretty incredible. And obviously, like it depends on how the draw comes out in terms of who plays who in the semifinals to lead to it. I
Yep.
think I would have preferred Northeastern versus BC final. I think that would have been a better game, honestly, overall. But that being said, BU did not give up in this game, and I appreciated the effort. It was very clear that Northeastern had their number, and they were able to execute much better. It was also fun. You mentioned the ties to the PWHL players, the Boston Fleet players who were Beanpot alum showed up
Yeah.
to drop the puck. It was super cool. So we
So
already talked about Alina Mueller, who had a really great week with the Fleet, by the way, this week. Megan Keller, Jillian Dempsey, Hannah Bilka, and the aforementioned Queen Erin Frankel. So
yes.
that was really fun to see the five of them, and that you could just see them like sort of reliving their days in college hockey as they were out there. It was really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think I, for some reason, skipped Keller there, but when in my rundown, but I thought that was great. There wasn't a lot of integration last year, and it just seemed like a little bit of a missed opportunity. I mentioned Corrine Schroeder. She just didn't feel comfortable leaving. At the time they were practicing in Connecticut, but playing, kind of a little bit of everywhere. And so it just the timing didn't work out. So I love that the Boston Fleet, they had some players that were able to be there. I think also what stood out is that the players at the Beanpot were taking an opportunity to call people in and like low key calling people out as well. But I mean, like we heard, it's a funny thing. I mean, investing in women's sports, it's almost like if you do it, then the fans know that the sport is around and they'll show up. And again, college hockey in the Boston area is a thing of its own, and that includes and has always included women's hockey. And so to see that for a second consecutive year, the Beanpot championship for women, and it's both games, so the third place game and the championship game both at TD Garden. I think that's huge, and I mean, more of that, right? We just want more of it. And so, the next big tournament on the NCAA side that we'll talk about, of course, is going to be the Frozen Four. But that being said, Rachel, we got to speak to a former Beanpot champion in Kendall, Coyne, Schofield. And that is because the PWHLPA, the Players Association, has named a new executive director, incoming executive director. So they're in a bit of a transition. We got the chance to speak to, of course, Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, who is the player president, and the new incoming ED, Malaika Underwood. So we're going to play a snippet of that conversation now, and make sure you check out the Locked On NHL channel, because we will run the full interview with both Malaika and Kendall on the channel. But here's just a little taste.
So excited to be here talking to Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, and Malaika Underwood, the new or incoming Executive Director of the PWHL Players Association. And I guess, Malaika, let's start with you and ask, what drew you to women's hockey and wanting to take on this role?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having us both here and for your interest in women's hockey broadly and specifically in the PWHL and the PWHLPA and this news. I am an athlete, a former athlete. I grew up playing baseball, not softball, but baseball. Played on the boys team in high school. Ultimately went on to play volleyball at the University of North Carolina before getting back into baseball at a high level, playing for the USA Baseball women's national team. And I did that for 17 years. And along the way, I also built out a career in sports business. And so for the past 20 years, I have been in and around athletes. And really at the heart of my career is supporting athletes, being there for athletes, building out business and organizations for athletes. And I've been watching what the players have done here with the PWHL, the league, the Players Association, and I've just been so impressed with them. They are remarkable people, and the growth of the sport and where the sport is, it's just such an exciting time. The record-breaking first season, the historic collective bargaining agreement, that's all laid the groundwork for something that's really, truly special. And so how could I not be interested in joining this movement? And I'm just really thrilled to help lead this next chapter and to make sure that the players remain at the center of it all, because I think that has been clear from the start and is what sets this league and this Players Association apart.
Well, I could certainly say you had me at baseball. I am a huge baseball fan. Sorry, Kendall, baseball is my first love, but I have fallen in love with women's hockey as well. And, just hearing all of that, I mean, it sounds like you have such a breadth of knowledge. But Kendall, I want to come to you here. What at this time in the PWHLPA made it right for this move? Can you just, walk us through why it was time for a change and how Malaika came onto the radar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we, first like to thank, Brian for all of his efforts over the last 2 seasons, and he'll be a part of the transition and supporting Malaika in those efforts. And so when we actually spoke to Brian from the very beginning, 2 years was his goal. And so we're coming up at that 2-year point, and we felt it was important to start that search process while still in season, to give the new executive director the opportunity to get to know the players, to get to in market while we're still in season. So Malaika will be starting in March and be able to get to each market, get to see the players. And we're super excited for this transition. Excited for Malaika to come in to lead us to incredible heights. I think we are so fortunate, privileged, and honored to be able to work with a person of Malaika's caliber, not only as a person, but as a business person, as an executive, as an athlete herself. I think there's so many similarities that we can all relate to in what Malaika has experienced and accomplished in her life, that we know she's going to lead this union to the best of her ability. And we're extremely excited. And I know I've been able to speak to Malaika a lot more than some of the other players. So I am so excited for her to get into market, to get in front of the players, for them to be able to meet her like I've had the opportunity and our board has had the opportunity to do so. So yeah, it's a very exciting time for the union and for the players.
The position, according to the announcement, takes effect March 3rd. So Malaika, what are you doing between now and then? And Kendall, what are the players doing to kind of support this onboarding and get her raring to go on March 3rd?
Yeah, it's not as if we'll just flip a switch on March 3rd, right? There's lots to transition and lots to dig into. I've already been connected to and will make an effort to meet with league staff so that I have a relationship there. And also, as we look to March, and as Kendall said, I want to get on the road. I want to meet all of the players.
For you, Kendall, what are some of the things on the whiteboard? What are the big ideas that now that you are in season 2 that you hope the players can really push forward?
Yeah, and whether those things are pushing forward prior to 2031 or in a new CBA after 2031, I think something simple and that we will always continue to push is increasing the salaries and pushing for more and increasing that minimum as much as we can, increasing the support that players receive. I think one thing for me is I think we've outgrown the reserve player spot. It's extremely tough for them to make ends meet, but then commit themselves and have a dream of wanting to be in this league. So they're doing that, but yet making $15,000 and working another job. And this is everything that we didn't want. Those are two things at the top of the list as an example.
Could you talk a little bit about the role of the Players Association in expansion talks and how you're working with the league on that front?
Yeah, first off, the takeover tour has been extremely successful. It's been awesome. So thank you to all the fans. I've been lucky to play in Denver, and I look forward to playing in Raleigh and in Detroit. But Denver was incredible. I'm sure you guys saw the "We Want a Team" chant, which was just bone chilling on the bench. We have not sat down with the league just yet from a union league perspective to talk about expansion. I hope we will be in very soon. But so my knowledge is not any greater than anybody else's in terms of what's to come with expansion.
We were hoping you were going to give us the goods there, Kendall. All right, we'll just have to wait a little longer. I mean, a great conversation that we had, Rachel. I would love to just hear from you first. In addition to what we had in that snippet, were there any other things that really stood out to you from the conversation and why the PA is making this move now?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way they talked about the transition and working with Brian Burke and kind of just there was a lot of attention to detail that they talked about and how it was going to work. And so I just feel really confident about that process for them.
Yeah, I agree. I also think when you watch the full clip, you'll also hear Malaika talk a little bit about her experience in other areas of sports, especially in women's sports, and the connections that she has to the NWSL. And of course, what a lot of people
Yes.
see as the gold standard in women's sports leagues, the WNBA. So I'm very curious for her to elaborate on those things. But right now, as incoming, and you'll hear from our conversation, Rachel, or folks listening will hear from you already heard it, but folks listening will hear what Malaika and how Kendall reacts to that experience and knowledge and how to use it towards the PWHL to place them where they want to be in the sports landscape. So check out that full interview. We will have a link in the show notes, whether you are listening on audio or watching on YouTube. Hey, YouTubers. But definitely check out that full interview with Malaika Underwood, incoming Executive Director of the PWHLPA, and of course, Kendall Coyne Schofield. We also definitely asked her about being able to win a championship with Minnesota, the Fleet, but also the OG Whitecaps. So I loved her answer there. All right, we have a lot more to talk about and to get you ready for the slate coming up in the PWHL this week and between our episodes. So that's what we'll do. We'll give you our game of the week and, of course, review the 3 stars of last week. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now, we know it's NFL playoffs, so from big upsets to game-winning drives, you are better off when you lock in with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Actually, it's now $300, in bonus bets guaranteed. $300 in bonus bets when you win your first bet. And I also have talked about this before on the show, but if you want to check out there are actually FanDuel odds for the PWHL. For example, we've got the New York Sirens and the Toronto Scepters here, plus 1.5 on the spread for the Sirens, minus 1.5 for the Scepters. You can see also the over-unders here. The Boston Fleet versus the Minnesota Frost. We see what we've got here. Very similar odds there. And you can even see the odds for the Walter Cup winner, where once again, Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, and the Minnesota Fleet have the best odds there. So many ways on FanDuel to get involved, even if, you're not just focused on the NFL season. So again, fanduel.com, join today and get started. You'll get that $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. Make the playoffs this season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, the Locked On Podcast Network, and hey, even the PWHL. Rachel, this was a jam-packed show and a lot of fun. We got another interview in, but let's give folks, our picks for game of the week. What games are we watching? Actually, before we do that, let's first give them the 3 stars of the week, and then we'll end on the games that you and I will be locked in on. But 3 stars, including one of our guests for today's episode. I mean, Malaika Underwood. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, wouldn't that be something though? If she already got one of the 3 stars. Of course, we're talking about Kendall, Coyne, Schofield. She comes in as the 3rd overall star.
Yep. And, she was a huge contributor to all of the goals pretty much that the Frost scored in the week. And, she's just consistent. And you cannot beat being consistent as far as offensive output, and she just does it week after week.
That's it. She led all skaters with 5 shots against the New York Sirens. That game was at Peru Center. She continues, as you said, to be a leader and is definitely a steadying force for this Minnesota Frost team. Then you have Abby Boreen. Got to speak with her a little bit in Seattle. She scored twice, her first multi-point game of her PWHL career in the victory over the aforementioned Minnesota. She also had an assist in the game versus Ottawa. Somerset, Wisconsin native surpassed her totals in goals and points from last season. And so she's your 2nd star, Abby Boreen from Montreal, the Victoire. And then your 1st star of the week, also from Montreal, Erin Ambrose. Okay, can we just clap it up for the defenders getting some love? I love when we see defenders get some love in 3 stars and all of the things. So Ambrose had assisted on 5 of the 6 goals that the Victoire scored in their last set of games. She already doubled her season total. She brought 3 assists in the last week that would double her season total. And, a lot of this also happening on this 2nd leg of the takeover tour, which Kendall, Coyne, Schofield mentioned. 8 assists for the season, 5 on the power play. So there you go.
That's the part that's really impressive to me is the Montreal power play. And she's just a huge part of it. And I think, when you talk about defensemen and
defenders
or defenders and scoring, I think it's just important that, it's not just points on the board. It's how do they manage the puck on the power play. And she's so good at that aspect of it as well. And so I think it's not just those points that she got. They're important, but she manages the puck very, very well on the power play.
And that's huge, and you want to have your D be able to help move the puck and get you transitioning into your offense. And we know that hockey, just in general, at all levels, teams that are able to execute the transition, those are usually the teams that are winning. And so Erin Ambrose being able to keep the Montreal team going, huge. So those are your 3 stars. Okay, Rachel, we'll start with you. What game are you circling on the calendar from the upcoming slate?
Well, this is all Boston all the time for me this week, apparently. Again, much to my chagrin. But Sunday's game, Boston at Minnesota. So Boston has won 2 in a row. They seem energized. You know, they had their first, I think, regulation win that was by more than a goal in a very long time recently. And, you know, can they keep this going? And then on the flip side, Minnesota has lost their last 2. They aren't exactly spectacular at home. Like you look at their home record and they're like, I don't know here. So I like if Boston can defeat Minnesota in this game, I think we really have something here as far as maybe
Ooh.
flipping the script on this season a little.
Ooh, and that would be interesting because, you know, we've talked about it time and time again, how things looked to be at the start of last season are not how they turned out towards the end. And with
Yep.
Minnesota in particular, and Kendall kind of told this, she mentioned this to us, right, in that interview that she's like, we kind of have to get things back on track here because I think we're getting to that point in the season where everyone's starting to get their legs. Or the
Yep.
teams that are going to get their legs, that's what they're doing. And I think we're going to start to see separation. I know we talked on last week's episode about, you know, how some of these games would they determine who's at the top of the table. And lo and behold, you know, we do see that you know, there's been a little bit of a shakeup once again. And so, you know, Montreal is still making a case to really be at the top, but stay at the top. And so Minnesota feeling a little bit of pressure, I think. But I am actually going to pick a different game. And I love a revenge game. I am that petty. Yes, I am that petty. I love a good revenge game. So I've got circled just before our next episode, New York at Boston. I'm very curious to see, as I mentioned at the top of the show, how Taylor Girard is used by New York. I think this is a team that they need to be able to execute. They have amazing firepower. Like the forwards on the New York squad on paper are just like, who wants to deal with that, right? But maybe it's been the combinations at time that have just not led to the consistency. I think also there's probably a conversation about defense that we might want to have somewhere down the road. We alluded to that when we talked about Corrine Schroeder. So I'm curious to see what Taylor Girard can do. It seems like she's going to be on that PK, but going up against her former team. So what's that going to look like? That's the game that I have circled. But always we have a good slate. We know coming up, there's going to be more takeover tour games that we can talk about. I'm hoping to get to that one in Raleigh. I'm not going to lie, because Rachel is someone who went to college in North Carolina. I've been pushing. I know there's a big contingency of women's hockey fans in NC Raise Up. So I'm very curious to see what the crowd looks like, and selfishly wanna be there among those taking in that game. But we've got a little ways before we get to that game. Anything else, Rachel, before we wrap up this week's episode of the Women's Hockey Report?
Well, I do want to acknowledge that both the USA and Canada have announced their rosters for the rivalry series games
That's
coming
right,
up in
Canada.
early February. We're going to talk more about them on a future show when we preview the next leg of the rivalry series. But one of the players that did not make that team and hasn't been enough of the conversation we have talked about on today's show, and I'm looking forward to having that discussion.
Ooh, yeah. Rivalry series rosters are always interesting. And I think there's always I always like to look at how the teams, especially hosting, take on their rosters. But yeah, we will get into that. So a little bit of a tease we'll have to leave you on, but we will get into that next week on the Women's Hockey Report, which comes to you every Saturday morning. If you're not already, please subscribe to the Locked On NHL channel. You can also make sure that you keep up to date with Rachel and I, both of us using Blue Sky. So we will have more snippets from the conversation with Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, and Malaika Underwood. And of course, we will keep up with what's happening in women's hockey until the next episode. But for Rachel Donner, my name is Erica L. Ayala. Thank you so much for joining us once again for the Women's Hockey Report. We'll see you next week.